especially, leave for Australia. And likewise, the European countries were prepared to agree to their citizens migrating in large numbers. The government, of course, put very great stress on British migration, and in fact Mr. Colwell expressed the wish that for every one non-British migrant there should be 10 British coming to Australia. And after all, the British were, or had been, at least until the fall of Singapore, our protectors and our supporters. And anyway, the Australian population was supposed to be 90-something or other percent of British origin. So the British loyalty and the support for the English language and opposition to other languages was very, very strong. If the economy in Australia was, there were shortages of factory workers, unskilled labourers and so on, then the immigration doors were thrown wide open for migrants with little or no skill from countries such as Italy and Greece, Yugoslavia, Spain, mainly Mediterranean countries, you might say, as well as Britain, of course, to come to Australia. But there were some millions of such people, included in their numbers, of course, being prisoners of war, concentration camp survivors, Holocaust survivors, and numerous members of minority groups of one sort or another who had been persecuted or who had suffered on one side or another during the Second World War. There was also, I think, across Europe, a feeling of never again. I want to get out. I want to go somewhere as far away from the scene of this war and suffering and bitterness and death and tragedy. Go as far away as I possibly can. And in countries like Germany, in particular, not to mention Eastern Europe, that feeling was very strong, and accounts in part for the success of Australia's post-war assisted passage migration schemes. They had agreed to accept 12,000 displaced persons through the International Refugee Organisation. As time went on, they accepted 170,000. In order to make the best possible selection, they sent an officer called George Kiddle, specially to Germany, together with medical and allied support staff, in order to fill the first transport of displaced persons to Australia with Baltic refugees. The first shipload were specially selected in terms of being impressive physical specimens, not people who had been on meagre diets or who were undernourished or who had physical disabilities or anything of that sort. The intent was to select for cosmetic publicity purposes, to select a boatload of impressive Nordic people in order to try to satisfy the Australian population, I suppose, that, well, even if they're not British, they're so much like the British and so much like us that there won't be any trouble assimilating them. And the government sought to give the impression that, as distinct from other refugees, I suppose they were thinking mainly of Jewish ones, these people were eminently acceptable, clean, well-built, healthy, fit, ready to give 2 years of their lives working to help build up Australia, and that Australian people should, far from resenting them or thinking that we didn't want Europeans in this country, we only wanted British people, the Australian people were to be favourably impressed with the first shipload.
Does this imply that there was a fear of the government saw there might be problems?
It does imply that, and it implies a certain racism, I think, and in a way the government probably was only reflecting what they saw as the Australian people's feelings on these matters. The understanding was that we wanted as many Dutch, as many Scandinavians, as many Germans and Austrians and Swiss and Belgians and a few French as we could possibly get, but if the numbers, along with the British, still weren't enough, well then we could be a little more generous in the countries of southern Europe in selecting under assisted passage schemes especially. And in southern Europe, the preference for northern Italians as against southern Italians, so-called, for northern Greeks, Macedonian Greeks in particular, as against southern and Ireland Greeks. The difficulties put in the way of people from the eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt and other source countries in the Middle East. I think those difficulties and restrictions are a reflection of the unspoken, I suppose, and not always unspoken, but of the preference to keep Australia white, and the sense that Middle Easterners and Mediterranean people somehow or other are different, not really white, or off-white, or sun-tanned, or something or other else, but not as acceptable as people who are really, genuinely European, which meant white.